This is Join Us in France, episode 509. 509. Bonjour, I'm Annie Sargent, and Join Us in France is the podcast where we take a conversational journey through the beauty, culture, and flavors of France. Today, I bring you a conversation with Elyse Rivin of Toulouse Guided Walks about her recent weekend in Marseille. She enjoyed the sun, the sea, and the culture, of course, and she gives fantastic recommendations for how to spend a very pleasant 2 days in the second largest city in France. You should listen to this episode because you'll hear Elyse share an authentic local experience, give you practical travel tips, and cultural insights. Of course, this is Elyse, as well as make a list of exciting activities in Marseille and how to enjoy the local cuisine. So if you're ready for some relaxation and recreation in the south of France, this episode is for you. This podcast is supported by donors and listeners who buy my tours and services, including my itinerary consult service, my GPS self-guided tours of Paris on the Voice Map app, or take a day trip with me around the southwest of France in my electric car. You can browse all of that at my boutique, joinusinfrance.com/boutique. And remember, Patreon supporters get the podcast ad-free as soon as it is ready. Click on the link in the show notes to enjoy this Patreon reward for as little as $2 a month. For the magazine part of the podcast, after the interview today, I'll discuss how the Paralympics are going to do so much to help Paris step into a brighter future. Bonjour, Elyse.
Bonjour, Annie.
We have a fun recording today about a weekend in Marseille, which you just did, didn't you?
I certainly did.
You went and got some sun, got away from the Toulouse rainy weather.
Yes. I got away from the Toulouse rainy weather. This was 2 weekends ago, so this is really, really recent. The weather there was absolutely glorious. And then I came back here to our horrible heat. It went from the rain to the heat. This is summer in Toulouse. We love Toulouse. Come to Toulouse. Come and take one of my visits. Come and visit everything, but don't come in July and August if you can avoid it. Really.
Agreed.
It's a bit rough here in the summertime. But actually, I just wanted to say I'm very excited because I feel like I'm doing one of your trip reports.
That's right.
This is my little trip report for a weekend in Marseille.
That's right. Trip reports are good. You'll see. You'll be good at this.
So basically, it was a 2.5-day weekend. I took the train from Toulouse and arrived in Marseille by noon, which is really nice. There's a 4-hour train.
Oh, that's better than I thought it would be. I figured it might be longer than that.
The irony is, of course, it's longer than the train from Paris to Marseille, which is a much greater distance, but that's because we don't have the bullet train.
Right, no TGV, yeah.
No. But there are 2 or 3 times a day, there are direct train lines without having to change or anything that go right from, actually, I believe it's the Bordeaux-Marseille train.
Ah, okay.
But, I got it at 8 something, and then I was in Marseille train station by a little after 12. It was fine. It was really direct, no problems, on time, and all the rest of it. And, of course, you can do the same thing literally coming from Paris.
Yeah. In Paris, it would be 3 hours, perhaps?
3 hours. The reason I went is because I had a member of my family ending a vacation that she had taken in France, and she was going to be in Marseille for a day, my cousin. I hadn't seen her in a while, and I thought, I do have a friend who lives in Marseille, and I love Marseille. So I thought, oh, good reason to go. So I got there at noon and had a lovely half-day Friday, and then, of course, the evening, and then I had a full day Saturday, and then I had Sunday just about till about 5 o'clock in the afternoon.
Okay, so yeah, you had a good day and 2 days and a half.
Yeah, exactly. And it was a chill weekend. There was activity, but I saved the beach part, the sea and beach and park part for Sunday, and that was wonderful, absolutely wonderful.
Okay, well, I want to hear the details.
Okay. So
do tell.
Well, for people, I don't know how many people have actually gone to Marseille. I mean, I know Marseille has a bad reputation. There is a part of Marseille that's absolutely beautiful. And Marseille is a huge city, of course, it's an enormous city. And it's really it's long. It goes basically north-south. It's counterintuitive in the sense that when you look at a map of France, you see the Côte d'Azur, which is kind of going east-west, but the actual Bay of Marseille is a long bay that is north-south. And so there's a whole stretch of it from the center, which is where the old port is, going south. That is where all of these activities are. And the entire coast has been arranged so that there are these wonderful beaches and coves and activities along the beach. And in the last 15, 20 years, in spite of what other people may have heard, it's really been made into this absolutely wonderful place to visit. And of course, it was European City of Culture a few years ago. And
explain what that means.
It means that a city is designated as being the representative of culture and different traditions. I don't know how they choose them, to be honest. I have no idea what group or committee does.
There must be a vote, because I've seen placards and things asking for people to vote for a specific city.
And in order to get that label, they had to do a lot of spiffying things up. And this is when they undertook the huge, huge work of building the old port, which is very beautiful and picturesque. And of course, is really from the beginning, Marseille is the city that was started by the Greeks as what they used to call a comptoir. It was basically a place for trading. And this is going back over more than 2,000 years. But everything radiates out from there. I don't know how many billions they invested, but they redid the entire wharf seaside area that goes basically from where the cathedral is, which is just north of the old port, down. They invested in the building of these two fabulous new incredible museums, which is part of what I did. They invested in cleaning up a whole part of this area. And so it's all extremely user-friendly. There are walkways everywhere. And it really, I have to say that I was amazed, because this is the second time I've been back in the last 8 months, just how wonderful it has become and how really user-friendly it has become.
That's really good to know.
Yeah, it's really good to know. So my suggestion is, and this has to do with my experience, I've been to Marseille many times, but if you're going to go, and I think it's worth 2 or 3 days actually, obviously the thing to do is to look for a place to stay close to the old port.
Yeah.
There are lots of hotels. There are high-end hotels. There are 2 or 3 that really are on the edge of the old port on both sides, the north side and the south side.
Right. Those have the nice view on
They
the
have
port.
a great view. One is this Radisson blue and the other one is where actually my cousin was staying, which is literally you walk out the door and the water's right there. You have a bunch of smaller hotels. You have Ibis. You have lots of Airbnbs.
So Ibis would be moderately priced.
In comparison to the other things. Of course, that is one of the things that's happened since the renovation of old Marseille, is that, of course, that means the prices have gone up. Interestingly enough, I was surprised to see that the restaurants have not increased their prices too much, because there are many, many, many restaurants around the old port.
Yeah.
But the hotels have gotten pricey. A lot of people do come for a couple of nights, and apparently so it makes sense. You want to stay in a really nice hotel that's air conditioned, that's right next to the old port, and so that's, they managed to get the prices up that way,
Right. And in Marseille, it does make sense to have an air-conditioned room because, it can be warm, very, very warm.
I mean, the weather was glorious. It was probably in the low 80s, sunshine. There wasn't a cloud in the sky. It was really one of those absolutely magnificent weekends. And the sea, of course, is absolutely splendid. And you have that light. One of the reasons I love Marseille is that the reflection off of the Mediterranean, and it's already white. It, really is like a white city. And the way they built, there's this area called the Corniche that goes down a few miles that follows these curves. A good chunk of it is walkable. And they've set up benches the entire length of this walkway. It's a few miles of walkway. Part of these benches are covered with mosaics that are very colorful. Each bench is paid for by a school, an association, or a family, and it has as a motif the sea or Marseille. And I did part of this with my friend, not with my cousin, but they're adorable. They're just absolutely adorable. It really takes away this feeling of, oh, why would you go to Marseille? No. There's a whole half of Marseille that's absolutely wonderful.
Right. Hopefully some of these benches are shaded as well.
Not really. No, not really. So that's the only problem, of course. There are areas where the beaches are down below, and then there are areas where the beaches are actually flush with the walkway.
Right.
It depends on which beach, because there's a whole bunch of different beaches. Which beaches have, parasols, which beaches have this and that. But the walkway itself, no. Unfortunately, no. This is not, there are no trees right there. This is really the coastline, But to begin with, so the first afternoon really stuck to the old port and went to this area. It's not very big. It's called Le Panier, which means the basket. And it's right behind the old port on the north side. So it was really right there, literally right there. And it's this very small, dense area. It's hilly. It's got these narrow little windy streets. It's very, very, very Italian in aspect. It used to be a while ago, very poor. It's the oldest part of Marseille. It's historically the oldest part. And because in the last 25, 30 years, they took the old convent there and turned it into a contemporary art museum, and they set up art studios nearby. A lot of artists moved in, and then they started making these lovely little cafe places and bakery places, and it basically got gentrified. So there are still some little streets where you have the families that have lived there for a long time mixed in with this kind of like gentrification. I kind of like that mix,
That sounds like a fun place to visit.
It's really a fun place to visit, and you walk around and, I'm a sucker for bakeries and then I go into the Contemporary Art Museum, which is very interesting. It's really a nice museum, and it has permanent exhibit and it has lots of temporary exhibits, and it has a lot of performances and concerts. So Marseille has become extremely dynamic in its art scene as well.
That's great.
Fine art school. But isn't the only reason. A lot of artists just move there. And so it has become very, very dynamic in terms of the art scene. And then from there, because of the way it's situated, and you'd have to really look at a map to understand that what I'm talking about is you have the hotel right on the water, and then you walk 10 minutes and you're up inside this area called the Panier. And then you visit this area, and then you visit this museum and stop for coffee, whatever. And then you can go out going basically to the west. You take another little street down and you wind up on the big, big, big avenue that has recently been built. That's right across the street from the huge wharf side where you have the Museum.
Yeah.
And the Museum is the Museum of Civilizations of the Mediterranean. That's what that stands for.
Right.
And several years ago, I had tried to go when one of my sisters was visiting, and we had been staying for 2 days in Aix. And like idiot, I should know better, we wound up going to Marseille the one day of the week it was closed. Dude, I have since been able to go back, and twice have been back, and this was the second time I've been back, and it's absolutely wonderful. Yeah.
Why?
Well, first of all, I love the building. I mean, it's a huge contemporary architecture that is really interesting. It's enormous. It's right on the water. You can't even imagine what it's like. It's got this enormous esplanade around it. And then inside, it has lots of different kinds of exhibits. And we saw one exhibit that was about fashion from the different ethnic traditions of certain countries around the Mediterranean. That was a huge exhibit that was absolutely gorgeous. We saw another exhibit that was about food traditions. So a lot of the exhibits have to do with kind of multicultural things, but they touch on food, culture, fashion, art, music. You have rooms that have musical instruments. Each few months, they change the display, and then there's a permanent collection of certain things. Down below, there are objects they have found coming out of the sea. So you get a little bit, it's not a natural history museum. It's not an art museum. It's its own thing.
Yeah, it's an ode to the culture of the Mediterranean.
Exactly.
The cultures
of the Mediterranean. Right. And then you go up to the top and you have this rooftop cafe kind of restaurant, which is like, it's like,
oh yeah?
Yeah. Fancy.
She's looking uppity right now.
Yes, I'm looking uppity. I got my uppity look on,
Yeah.
It's like a very, very high-end glass of wine, your spritz. You could get a coffee. I actually got a cappuccino, and I thought, I was laughing, thinking, this is going to cost me a fortune. It didn't cost me much more than any other place, actually. But the place is one of these, you're up high, and so you have a view out over the Mediterranean. And
nice.
There's a walkway. The way they built this is what I find wonderful is that they conceived of this whole area so that everything is interconnected. So that's one of the things I like the most about it. There's a walkway that takes you that I guess built out of concrete. I'm not even sure I paid attention. From the rooftop cafe, and it's like almost like a bridge. You go out over the water, and you have a view of the museum. You have a view of a check of the old port. You have a view of the islands out in the sea, and if you continue, it takes you to the fort of Sargent of the Knights of Jerusalem, and so you can actually almost do like a circuit all the way around. Now, on Friday, I didn't do that part. I just did the museum.
Right.
But you can actually spend hours just going from one part to the other, and they've made it so that it's accessible every which way. I find that fabulous,
So the cars are nowhere to be seen.
Underground parking. There is an underground parking, and it's a big one. So for people who, for instance, fly in, which of course is not what I did. If you fly into Marignan and you rent a car, of course it's, downtown Marseille is probably a mess to get into in terms of traffic and circulation. But people should know that there are 2 huge underground parking areas that are right there. And so you can park easily.
Right.
It's the getting in and out of the old dense part of the city that can be, gets bogged down. But you can do that. And if you're doing that as a way of doing a stopover in Marseille before going to Cassis or Antibes or further along the coast, then that's where you would park.
Right. So don't even try to drive around those little old
no.
city streets. You will die. Well, or you will get blocked by bollards or something.
Exactly.
If you drive into one of those big French cities, because you must, then just go directly to the underground parking garages. And you will have to pay for however long you stay there. 30 euros a day is normal for any sort of place like that in 2024 anyway. But don't try to park anywhere else. If you have accommodations that tells you that they have parking, ask them, is it private parking reserved for me exclusively? Or is it like street parking, good luck to you, because that doesn't work. And also you need to ask them, are there bollards in the way? Because as a visitor, you're not going to get the remote control that you need to lower the bollards. Only taxis have this. Ubers do not. Local residents have it. Emergency services have it. But you will not. So that's a really important thing to check. But the streets are made so that you can go to the underground parking garages areas. That's how it's designed. So if you're not parking at the end of the metro line and taking the metro into the city, which would be free parking usually, most of the time, that's free parking because then you use your metro card to exit and it lets everybody know that you use the metro. It's free for you. But if you don't want to do that, then drive in, go directly to the underground parking lots and pay for parking.
Absolutely.
Sorry. Yeah. But this comes up so many times in the Facebook group that I have to repeat it ad nauseum because Americans don't seem to understand that we don't have big parking lots that are free in France. In the cities, you have to pay. Well, I guess in America it's the same, right? If you go to San Francisco, you wouldn't expect to.
Well, in New York, it costs a fortune. No, but certainly we're talking about an old city with narrow streets and you don't want to have to deal with them, period.
Right.
And everything is one way except for 1 or 2 of the big boulevards,
Yes.
The big avenue that they now have that leads to these underground parking areas is a 2-way thing, but still, you don't want to have to deal with that. That's just not what you want to spend time doing.
Exactly. Exactly.
Eating. Okay. I don't have a particular name of a restaurant to suggest, but around the old port. Now, the old port is not that big, filled with beautiful sailboats. Of course, the Belle M was there when the flame came in, and that was the other big deal. So they've left part of the structure. This was just, a month and a half ago?
Yeah. The Olympic flame came by boat.
And my friend who lives in Marseille came down to the port and sat on the grass to watch the boat come in. And she said it was just absolutely wonderful. It was just, it was this big, friendly kind of event. There are hundreds of restaurants around the old port. And also there are 2 big open squares that are on the south side of the port, not the Panier side, but just on the other side. We're talking about something that takes 10 minutes to walk to, literally, not more than that. And they all have seafood and they all have fresh fish. And they're all fine. I mean, I'm sure there are some people who would look for something that's listed as an almost starred restaurant, and I'm sure that there are. But you don't have to worry, and they have really relatively decent prices. You don't have to worry about that either. So I would say that you don't have to worry about where you go to eat. Look at the menus, check it out.
Yeah, it's more important to find a place that has a table that you will enjoy. Like perhaps that table is in the shade and that's what you'd like. Perhaps that table is, I don't know, has comfortable chairs. That's what I look for, shade and chairs.
Shade and chairs, yeah. It's interesting because the big square that's very Italianate, that's behind the southern side of the old port, has lots of places that I've been to for lunches at other times when I've been to Marseille. But any of these places, you're absolutely right. What you want to do is pay attention to where the sun is. If you're doing this in the dinner time, it's not as complicated as at lunchtime. You want to be in the shade at lunchtime.
Yeah. And they will pretty much have similar offerings for similar prices. And they all try desperately to stand out as the one that you must go to. And so they have people write blog posts and reviews and whatever. But really, that is not something you should worry about. Just go with your nose and your eyes, and where your behind is going to be comfortable for a few hours.
Absolutely. So that was Friday.
Okay. Beautiful Friday. How much time would you say you spent in the museum?
At least 2 hours.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did that feel like you were rushing or?
No. I could have spent a little bit more, but this is the second time I've been. The first time I went, I actually spent a little bit more because it was an exhibit that was very, very big. And, sometimes I just want to sit for a minute and then keep on going. I know I'm not good anymore at just standing for 3 hours without having a seat. You can also go out and come back in on the same ticket.
Oh, that's good.
So if you want to, you can do that. I mean, there are some people that take a lot of time. People have different ways of dealing with museums as well. Some people just go through very quickly, and then it depends on the exhibit. So I would say 2 hours is a decent amount of time.
So is it mostly visual?
Yeah.
Things?
Although there's some text. The exhibit that was smaller, that was about food and some recipes, was kind of fun. There was a little bit of text in English. Most of it was in French, but they had papers that you could take that had recipes on them.
Ah, like that.
And then they had tasting things, like they had herbs, and it was mostly about different things coming
Smelling?
from North Africa. There was smelling, and then there was like little kinds of like woodsy herbs that I'd never heard of before, So they must do a lot of scholastic groups and things like that.
Do you get to touch a lot or smell a lot?
No, there was this particular food thing, yes, but the other one that was really about the traditional folkloric fashions. No, certainly you didn't touch
right.
anything.
And the music, do you get to hear the musical instruments?
No. You just look at them. They do have special events. I mean, I wasn't there for one, So when they have special events, they actually have concerts.
Right.
And so they do sometimes use the ancient instruments and things like that. And then they had some mechanical stuff downstairs. I had to say that, it was the part that I didn't pay attention to. I just don't.
What do you mean mechanical?
Well, there was like these old cars, and then there was like these old tractors and things. And I kept thinking, I'm not sure what they were really doing there.
Well, perhaps they are tractors of the Mediterranean.
Mediterranean, I don't know.
Move over, John Deere. We got our tractors. Who knows?
But
you're
anyway,
not interested in tractors.
No, I'm not. I'm sorry, I'm not interested in tractors.
I am shocked, Elyse. Shocked.
But I think it was cool. I love the whole thing. There are places you just decide that you just like whatever the atmosphere is in them and everything. And it's big and airy, and everything seems to be set so that it's really easy to circulate around and come back out and, all
and
of that.
I'm assuming they have cafes and places
Absolutely.
you can stop.
Well, the big, of course, there's the big rooftop one. Then there's a small one that's on the ground level with the wharf where you can get something and you can actually walk outside. And then they have all these benches outside. It's really, everything about it is user-friendly, really user-friendly. So the next day, Saturday, go back to the same area.
Yes, because there's plenty to do there.
There's plenty to do there. And do something that, oh my goodness, it was so much fun. Went with my friend to the reproduction of the Grotte de Cosquer.
I'm really looking forward to that one personally.
Okay. So I did not know what to expect. So what do we have? Everybody knows about Lascaux and then the fact that they've reproduced it. And then they have Chauvet, which you've been to, and I have not. Cosquer is an underwater cave. It was not an underwater cave. In prehistory, there was no water. The water was
far away.
Was far away. And in the beginning of the 1990s, two professional divers found this cave. They knew that there were caves. They were actually exploring caves. But what they did not know and what they didn't expect to find was caves that actually had drawings and paintings and engravings on them underwater.
Right.
And it became a phenomenon because they realized that obviously it was the change in the climate that had made the waters rise. And so how many thousands of years ago were these actually done? Well, of course, it makes it harder to date them because they were underwater. But in relation to other things, they can't have been earlier than at least 20,000 years before. So over the years, what they have done is they have studied them. They have done the same kind of thing they've done with Lascaux, which is do these, reproductions with all the scientific measures and everything. And lo and behold, on the same esplanade as the Museum is another building. Actually, it's kind of like you go in to buy your ticket and you look around and there's a kind of building there and you think, okay, where's the cave? And what happens is you buy your ticket and you go into this building and they take you down this elevator and you go down into what is actually the level of where the cave would be under the water. And you sit in this little boat.
Oh,
And the boats are set up so that it's 4 to 6 people in each little boat. And the boat takes you around through and
you're in the underwater cave.
Like you're in the underwater cave.
How fun.
Totally wonderful.
Oh, yeah, I would love that.
And they've managed to do, it's like Lascaux. They've managed to reproduce the walls of the caves with all of the engravings and the drawings. There are over 400 of them that were actually, the reason they stayed is because this part of the cave was sealed off for thousands of years. It wasn't washed away by the seawater. And so you do this thing where you go around, and so you sit there and you go around and, it was so much fun. I can't believe it.
Are the boats like on a rail underneath so that they
do these like fake waterfalls. So you have the water is next to you all around, and you see everything. You feel like you can just go out and touch it, like that.
So it's like a Disney ride, but with prehistoric paintings.
But prehistoric paintings, and they're audio phones with different languages. So you get the explanation of every single stop of what you see, and they tell you where to look, and if it's up above or next to you or whatever, because it's everywhere. And I don't remember, but I think the visit takes about an hour.
So it's in depth.
Oh yeah, it was wonderful. I would go back tomorrow. It was just the most fun thing. And then you come back up on the elevator, and it turns out that you take another elevator and you go up another level, and there's a museum of prehistory that explains everything. What you just saw, plus besides all of the animals that would have been living there and what the land looked like and everything. So there's this other part that's all museum, and then there's a part that's bookshop and shop that's wonderful, huge, with all kinds of books and then reproductions of things. And it was just a wonderful, wonderful experience.
I need to go. I need to go do this.
And on top of everything else, down on the street level, on the other side of the building where you go in for this, there's this cafe restaurant that is basically a kind of cafeteria style, but that has high-end food that is absolutely delicious. So the whole experience is wonderful.
Yeah.
The whole thing.
Were you able to buy your ticket in advance, or did you buy it at the door?
We bought it at the door. Now, it may have been because we went relatively early, because they do have a limited number but it's like every 20 minutes or every half hour. And I saw that there were some people, by the time we got our tickets, there were people not very far behind us.
In line.
That were in line, and they were basically told in 2 hours or in 3 hours, So you can buy the tickets in advance.
That might be better. Because that way you can time it however you'd like.
Yeah. I would suggest that on certain days, and especially if it's holiday weekends and things like that, you're better off, especially if you're more than one or two people, because families, they would just put together in the same little boat.
Right. It's just like a Disney ride.
It's like a Disney. I couldn't get over how well done it was, to be honest. At first I was like, oh, it's like a Disney ride, I was very skeptical. But
but those are good.
But it was really, really, really well done. It's as well done as Lascaux, I have to say.
As well as Lascaux. That is quite the bar. Yeah.
I mean, every little reproduction of every bump in the walls of these underground caves, and they give you the explanation of how the divers found the places, and how they tested them and everything. It's really a wonderful experience, I have to say.
You remember how much it cost?
Yes, I believe. Did I add it in my notes? If I'm not mistaken, it's a little pricey. I think for adults, it's 18.
Oh, that's not so bad. 30 is still okay. Yeah, that's fine.
I'm pretty sure it was 18 per adult. And I think there's a family price for 2 adults and 2 children as well. And children under, I think, 17, it's 11 euros or something like that.
Okay.
There's a reduction for children. So that was in the morning, going to Cosquer.
You almost said Costco.
Your favorite place? Yeah, Cosquer.
No, honestly, I would prefer going to Cosquer than Costco.
Right, yeah.
I mean, I'm not that crazy.
It was really wonderful. And it's funny because, of course, the weather was glorious, but still, this was just such a fun and wonderful thing to do. And then the afternoon, after a nice little lunch, not a big lunch, but a nice little lunch there, took a boat ride.
Aha, another one of my favorite things to do.
Another boat ride.
Not underground.
But in fact, in between, I shouldn't forget that walked and went into the fort, the Sargent fort. You can get to the fort through the esplanade, that is where the Museum is and where the Grotte of Cosquer are, or out on the avenue. And what they've done is they've renovated this fort, which basically is from the 1100s. It was originally created by the Knights of Jerusalem before they went on a crusade. And then it was redone by Vauban for Louis XIV. And then, of course, it fell into ruin. And so it was basically rubble and a little bit of wall. And it was in the last 35, 40 years that they've done this fabulous job of putting together. So you have part of the walls that are really the ancient walls, and then part of them that have been more or less rebuilt, but you can't really, you can kind of see it, but they invested billions in doing this whole area because it's really well done.
Perhaps just millions.
Yeah, maybe millions. Maybe. But you can walk from the Museum. There's these passageways. It's fabulous because you don't have to go out on the street. You can go on the street if you want, but you can go through this other way. And then there are 2 or 3 places where you can go inside and you see what the courtyards were in the medieval citadel and look at the old walls and the vestiges. And there are 2 or 3 rooms. One of them has a little bit of a shop. So you get the dose of really old medieval fortifications.
Nice.
At the same time. And then you go out and you go a little further along the port and you go back towards where you have the excursion boats and you have several choices. You can take a boat to the island of Ypres, which is in the novels, of course.
Alexandre Dumas, of course. Yeah.
To go see where the Count of Monte Cristo was held prisoner.
Yes.
And you can take a boat to go to the 2 islands of Frioul, which are interesting. From a distance, they just kind of look like rocks. But basically, there are 2 tiny little villages. There are a bunch of restaurants and there are some beaches.
Okay.
So you can do that. Or there are also some excursion boats that leave from the old port, take you to the Calanques.
Yeah, the Calanques are gorgeous, but it probably takes a bit longer.
But all of those are contingent on the weather.
Aha.
So, in fact, surprisingly, of course, there are days when the sea is rough and they will not go out.
Mm-hmm.
That's just a question of luck.
Yeah.
So I did Frioul. It's the second time, actually. It's kind of fun. These 2 islands it's interesting. It's kind of a pile of limestone in the middle of the sea. But you do have some places where you can sit on the beach, and then there are a few cafes, and there are some vestiges of old stone buildings. I don't know if they're fortifications or what, but I like the idea of taking a boat out, and from there you get a view of the whole old port and the hills on both sides with the cathedral on one side and Sainte-Marie de Grace on the other side. And It's a view of Marseille that's absolutely fabulous.
Very nice. Very nice. And that boat ride takes how long?
Well, you can get on and off. See,
okay.
I got off. I got off on the island. I think the boats are every half hour, and you just have to know when the last boat back is, so you don't get stuck. You know.
No, yeah, don't get stuck.
You're sleeping on the beach.
Not my idea of a good time.
No. But it's basically a get on, a stop on, whatever you call it.
Hop on, hop off.
You just have your round trip ticket, and you just know when the last boat back is.
Okay, so you can bring a picnic if you want.
Yes, absolutely. Most people do bring a picnic.
And can you swim?
It depends on the day. It depends on the current. There are these little beaches. There's some rocky stuff, and then there's some beaches. Unless you just want to wet your feet, you're better off being a good swimmer because you're really out in the exposed water. You're not in a protected zone. The first time I went with my nephew, and he couldn't have cared less, and he just jumped into the water, and I was like old auntie, watch out, but it was fun. It was really beautiful. And you can do the Calanque, but you do only the first one. This is not the same as if you go to Cassis and there are boat rides from Cassis where you can do 2 or 3 Calanque on the same ride because it's a much longer ride. But you can do it from the old port if you want to. And that's longer. That's a few hour back and forth boat ride.
Yeah. And the cost on that, more or less?
Honestly, I didn't check to see what the cost is on the one to go to the Calanque, but the other one, if I remember correctly, is about 16 euros per person. It's not a lot. So that was really a full day and still being at the old port.
Right. Yeah. You still haven't left the area.
I haven't left the area. I haven't gone to a church. This is new. I haven't visited a church this time. It's been water and seaside and old port. And of course, when you have glorious weather like that, it's just absolutely wonderful. Now, and the next day, thanks to my friend who actually lives in Marseille, I went to a couple of places that I've been to before, but I also discovered 2 other places that I didn't know. And they are 2 parks. And it turns out that there are some fabulous, very, very big parks in Marseille. And so this was going down south along what is called the Corniche, which is the drive that takes you along the coast. It's a few miles of coastal driving.
She had a car.
She came and got me at the old port. I do know, because I did look it up, you can go to any of these beaches by bus. You can take a bus straight down the Corniche, which is what it's called, and you can stop, and there are a whole bunch of beaches along the way, okay? So going south, you get to an area, I'm not sure exactly in distance, but you go past the part where it's really built up, where you have lots of houses that are perched up on the hills that face the sea, and then you get to the area of what is called the beaches, and there's a whole series of them. They each have a name. The first one is a small one, which is where the beginning of all these benches with mosaics are, and it's called Prophet's Beach. I have no idea why it's called that. I should check it up, but it's a small one, but you go down below. You're still high up above. You're like up above almost on a cliff, and then you take these steps down, and it's a small cove with a sandy beach, but it's not a very big one. But then you go further south, and you get to the area around what's called the Rond-Point de Prado.
Okay.
And that is one of the major stops that you can get off from the bus. And there you have a whole series of beaches that are several miles long with beautiful sandy beaches with coves that have been set up so that it's a bit of protection from the open sea, and grasslands with benches. They've done a job that's absolutely fabulous. You can swim there.
Yeah.
You can bike there. And in a whole section of it, there's a bunch of restaurants and a bunch of snack bars, and there's a huge Ferris wheel. And there's all this activity. There are even playgrounds for children, and there are a couple of spots where you can actually rent a bike. So it goes a few miles long along the coast, and it's really beautiful, and it's really beautiful, clean beaches. And lo and behold, right across from there, especially at the one that's called the Prado Beach, Prado, literally across the main avenue that goes north-south, you have one of the entrances is to one of these 2 parks called the Borelli Park, Borely with an accent. And this is a park that has the botanical garden, has the Museum of Decorative Arts. It has a mansion from the 1700s, and it has a Chinese garden, an English garden, a French garden. It has a restaurant, it has a snack, and it has a place where you can rent bicycles.
Wow. That sounds like a fun place.
It's gorgeous. It's all green. It's 17 hectare, which is about 40 acres.
Mm-hmm.
It's got trees. It's got everything. It's got little ponds. It's got everything you could wish for. And it's literally across the avenue from the beaches.
Wow. And so if you wanted to rent a bike, you could just and explore the whole park, you can do that.
You can do that.
Or explore along the corniche.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And then takes a little bit more time because you need to do this either by car or with a bus. My friend took me to a park that this Borelli I had been to before. I did know that it existed, and it's very beautiful. It's very green, and it's got these gorgeous French gardens and English gardens and everything. But then she said, we're going to go someplace else. You've never been here before. And we went further south, a little bit further south, not much further, because then you get to an area called Madrague, which is technically part of Marseille, but was once a separate village. We're still on the same avenue going along the coast.
There's a very famous song called La Madrague.
La Madrague, ouais.
Do you know?
No, I don't know it.
It's a Brigitte Bardot song.
Ah, that's right. That's right. But isn't that where she had a house for a while, I think? Or that's the name of her house, actually, in Saint-Tropez, I think. It may be. Anyway, so my friend takes me to this area, and I'm thinking, what are we going to do? And she says, wait, you will be surprised. And sure enough, it's a park called the Pastre Park.
Okay. How'd you spell that?
Pastre, but I put it in capitals, but it's with an accent, actually.
Pastre, yeah, Pastre.
And guess what? It's a piece of land that is humongous. It's 112 hectare. Okay.
That is a lot.
It is a park that is both a municipal park, and part of it is actually part of the beginning of the Calanque.
Aha.
It was given to the city in 1975 by a Countess Pastre. Thank you very much.
Ah, merci, Madame Pastre. Madame la Comtesse.
Who had a mansion in the middle of this huge expanse of land. All of this land belonged to her family. I don't even know how many generations back it belonged to her family. Part of it is manicured. There are ponds, there are walkways, there's a hippodrome, there's an irrigation canal that is actually kind of cute because it has a walkway that goes along with it. And all of this is the part that's closest to the big avenue. And then you continue walking inside and you wind up being in the wilderness.
Wow.
In the Mediterranean wilderness, with the Mediterranean trees, with the white cliffs right there. And you can go hiking up into the mountains if you want to get really away from everything. And when we were there, right behind one of the buildings that was, we call a dependency of the mansion, one of the other buildings.
Right.
They were doing a demonstration on the different kinds of trees and the different kinds of plants and what was edible and not edible. They have these nature activities in the park all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And there were these 3 people showing how they use the wildflowers there to make honey. And apparently every weekend they have these activities that are like nature activities and things like that.
Sounds like a lot of fun.
It was a lot of fun. So we spent, basically, my Sunday was going to the beach. I didn't go swimming. I put my feet in the water. I think you have a picture of me with my little toesies in the water. I was too chicken. I should have been able to. It was warm enough, but I was really too chicken to go in the water. But we did the beaches. We did a long, long walk. We did a really nice long walk. And then we had a lovely, 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 but more expensive lunch. So this is what's interesting. I had one of my favorite things, which is a huge, enormous pot of fresh mussels, not just your basic moule marinière. There are 2 or 3 restaurants in this part near the Prado Beach that specialize in fish and seafood. The prices are much higher than in the old port.
Which is strange.
Which is very strange. But the portions are enormous.
Okay.
I was tempted to get a piece of fish. I saw somebody being served a huge dorade that was enormous, and it was, the plateau was just fabulous. Because I was thinking, wow, look at these prices, This was our big meal for the day on Sunday. Anyway, we were going to treat ourselves. But the pot of mussels was twice as big as normal. And they had all these kinds of sauces and everything. And had a rosé with it. I mean, it was just, this is my idea of a Sunday lunch, Yeah.
Now, you said it was more expensive. Quantify how expensive.
30.
Yeah, that's That's not expensive, Elyse.
But for mussels,
Yes, okay. For mussels, it is a bit. But, 30 for a nice Sunday lunch.
the fish was between 30 and 40.
Right.
Okay. But the mussels was a little bit of a surprise, but still, it was wonderful. I mean, it was just wonderful. And so we did our morning, really long walk back and forth, wet my feet, went from one end to the other of these long beaches, looked at everything, watched everything with a Ferris wheel and everything, had this long lunch. We sat around, took our time with the coffee, sat there, and then we went to this other park. And more walking. Of course, when I go to Marseille, I have to walk.
Right. Well, yeah.
And it was a real wonderful surprise. And then we made this quick stop just because I've been to Marseille so many times in this area that's this Madrague area, which is really, once was a separate little village. It's now technically part of Marseille, just because there's a place where you can go down to the water, but it's no longer a nice flat sandy beach. It's a bit rocky and everything. But I was kind of interested to walk down there and just take a look and get a last view of the sea before going back up to go back home.
Inland. That's what happens to me when I leave the beach as well. I'm always sad to leave the beach.
I have to say, first of all, it was a gorgeous weekend and the water is magnificent and really clear, and it was blue and turquoise and the light was gorgeous. There's a different light being next to the sea. And it was a wonderful weekend. I like my life in Toulouse, but boy, it's so wonderful to be by the sea,
Yeah,
so.
yeah. I hear you.
And then so there I was.
And the food is great as well.
And the food is great.
In that area. You have a lot of, the Mediterranean food you can't really beat that.
No, you can't. And I have to say that at one point we stopped, and because it is apricot season, I've been buying apricots here, but we stopped at some place where there was a vendor and bought some apricots there that were from the region right around just north of Marseille. I have never had more delicious apricots in my life.
Oh, there you go. Yeah.
They were big and juicy, and I thought, it must be the sea air. I don't think it was. Actually, no, it was just, so it was a lovely, lovely, lovely 2.5-day weekend, and I really recommend doing a stop in Marseille to everybody who's going to go into that area.
Right. And if it's your first time going to Marseille, of course, you should also go see the cathedral, Notre-Dame de la Garde. It's gorgeous. That would add another half a day. But you didn't go on this weekend because you had been before. Yeah.
I've been before,
and you had no prayers too.
And I had no prayer. I didn't have to worry about, no. And there are a couple other things. There's this lovely small museum that's 3 blocks from the old port called the Cantini Museum. That is a museum that usually has temporary exhibits that change all the time. I've been there other times that have had nice exhibits. This time I did not go. You have that. You have the Decorative Arts Museum that is out in the Borelli Park. You can actually explore a little bit more of the old downtown area, and you can go up to the 2 churches, interestingly enough, the cathedral on one side and then the other church that's devoted to the sailors that's on the other side. They're up on these hills, And then just walking around the old port and looking at the boats, it has a great atmosphere to it, So
yeah, hooray for Marseille. You made me want to go. I have been to Marseille, obviously, but I haven't ever spent a lot of time. We did a cruise stop once, and there are probably some people who will listen to this who are stopping as a cruise stop. So the cruise ships, they dock at an industrial port. But usually the cruise companies will set up buses that will take you into the city, or there's possibly, I think we did a city bus, come to think of it, with my husband, because to me, taking a city bus is not a big deal. But I think most of the cruisers paid Royal Caribbean for a transfer into the city. Yeah. But either way, you go into the city, you go to the old port, and then you could go to the church if you want to. The Petit Train Touristique will take you all the way up to the top, because it is kind of steep. Or you could go explore the Mucem and the Cosquer. Probably only one or the other in a half a day.
If you only have a half a day, absolutely only one or the other, right?
And to me, it would be Cosquer every time.
But if you don't have that planned ahead, you have more chance of just going into Mucem and then walking around visiting the fortifications of Sargent,
Yeah, that's true, because Mucem, you probably don't even need to reserve. You can just show up. Thank you so much, Elyse.
You are quite welcome, honey.
You are very good at these trip reports. You have to do it again.
Okay, I will. Merci beaucoup. Bye.
Au revoir. Again, I want to thank my patrons for giving back and supporting the show. Patrons get several exclusive rewards for doing that. You can see them at patreon.com/join us. Patreon, join us, no spaces or dashes. A special shout out this week to my Join Us in France champions, Dan Dempsey, Paula Park Fitzhugh, Kim Cox, and Robin Miller. Kim upgraded to the ambassador of the podcast level, and when I wrote to thank her, because, that's the highest level, it's very, very sweet, she said it was a good deal in her opinion because it includes the itinerary consultations. And yes, of course, I will help her plan whatever trip she has to do included in that Patreon reward. Thank you so much, Kim. Would you join them too? You can do it for as little as $2 a month. But if you can afford it, I would love to have you pledge more so you can have access to more rewards. Go to patreon.com/join us. And to support Elyse, go to patreon.com/Elyse Art. ELYSART. Thank you for your one-time donation, Kevin and Maura Stack. They did this using any button on joinusinfrance.com that says tip your guide. Kevin wrote, my wife and I wanted to send a contribution to give thanks for all you've done. We used your podcast and your Facebook community for our France trip. You're a joy to listen to, and you've built an amazing platform for travelers. Thank you so much, Kevin and Nora. This last weekend, I had my Zoom conversations with patrons. It was very fun. It's always good to touch base with everybody, and I showed them a lot of photos from my trip to Lille, which, this is audio. I can't show you photos, but on Zoom I can. Somebody left this review of my Montmartre tour this week. This person wrote, the technology worked very well. This worked so much better than having to start and stop and follow a map. Agreed on that one. It really worked flawlessly, and the narration and information provided seemed top-notch. Well, I sure hope so. Another walker wrote, very informative and easy to understand and follow, great historical stories. Yes, that's an important thing. My tours are essentially historical, except for the food tour, where we start with history and then we end on the food. But yes, I love history. What can I tell you? Planning a trip to France? Need personalized advice? Hire me as your itinerary consultant. Choose the Bonjour service for a 1-hour Zoom call with tailored recommendations, or go VIP for a more detailed follow-up guide. You can visit joinusinfrance.com/boutique to get started on that. And if you don't need a one-on-one consultation, you can still take me in your pocket with my GPS tours on the Voice Map app. These tours lead you to the best of Paris, covering the Eiffel Tower, Le Marais, Montmartre, Latin Quarter, Ile de la Cité, Saint-Germain-des-Prés, and the food tour around Les Halles. Podcast listeners get great discounts on these tours by buying them directly from me at the Join Us in France boutique. But this is a manual process. I have to get your request and respond with tour codes. So don't leave it till the last minute. If you buy via the Voice Map app, you'll pay a little more, but you'll get the tour immediately. So pick the one that works best for you. Today, I want to say how excited I am to be going to Paris for the Paralympics. We have tickets for many events. We'll be there for 6 full days, and we will be going to different things every day. We'll have to go all over the place to the different venues, either by bus or taxi. I'm driving us to Paris in the electric car, but we'll be parking the car, and I probably won't touch it again unless I really have to. Driving in Paris is stressful, but I've done it so much that that's not the biggest problem for me. Parking in Paris is a scourge. Although, starting on October 1st this year, any EV that weighs less than 2,000 kilograms will be able to park for free anywhere in Paris for 6 hours. So, that's my car. I'll be able to park anywhere I want in Paris. If I can find a spot, that is, and that is not a given. So it'll be bus or taxi for us because my future daughter-in-law, Melanie, is a wheelchair user, so we cannot take the metro or most of the RER. Only 25% of metros and trains in Paris are wheelchair accessible. And for the most part, the metro is not wheelchair accessible, even if there is an elevator. Sometimes there are stairs somewhere else that you can't get around if you are using a wheelchair. This is the busiest metro system in the EU, carrying over 4 million passengers daily. But only 29 stops of the metro are fully wheelchair accessible. It's going to cost between 17 and 22 billion euros to fix this, and it will take 20 years. But the president of the Paris region, Valérie Pécresse, has vowed to get it done. And I am so happy that they are even considering this because, when we started talking about the Olympics, they were like, oh, yeah, by the way, what are we going to do about the wheelchair access? And it was way too late to do anything about it. So this is the sort of thing that you have to work on for a long time. For the Paralympics, they've put in place 100 minibuses to take disabled visitors from the major train stations in Paris, that would be Montparnasse, Saint-Lazare, Gare du Nord, etc., to the venues. The problem with this plan is that, number one, you have to get to one of those major train stations. And number two, what happens to families like us, where only one of us is a wheelchair user? Will they transport all of us, or would they just take her? Knowing the RATP, I doubt there would be much flexibility there, so we'll take the bus or taxis. And the bus system in Paris is wheelchair accessible. It is, of course, slower than the metro, but it's doable. We'll also take some taxis. I mean, there's places we need to go where it would take 2 hours to get there on the bus. And so for those cases, we'll take a taxi. Because you can, with the G7, with the J7 app, you can request a taxi that is wheelchair accessible and for 4 people. So that's what we plan on doing. Paris really needs to get on with it because not having elevators is a pain for families as well. Strollers and escalators are not a good match. On French TV, they've had lots of interviews with para-athletes and explained why this has to become a priority. And I'm so happy that this is now part of the normal conversation in France. It wasn't just last year, so this is great. Paris will be all the better for it, and that's a good way to spend my tax dollars, if you ask me. My thanks to podcast editors Anne and Christian Caravan, who produced the transcript. Next week on the podcast, an episode about renovating a home in southern France with Brian Tollison. Actually, near the Riviera is where he found his home. Brian is a wonderful, enthusiastic person who was at bootcamp in 2024. So I had a chance to meet him, and it was a fantastic conversation. You don't want to miss it. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you join me next time so we can look around France together. Au revoir. The Join Us in France Travel podcast is written, hosted, and produced by Annie Sargent and copyright 2024 by Addicted to France. It is released under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives license.